Hello, my name is Jessica Uitvlugt. I am one of the pastors on staff here. It's so good to see you this morning. We are so glad that you're here. To all of the kiddos and the parents in the room, happy last week of summer. We almost made it. We're so close. I don't know what I'm talking about. I only have one kid going back to school next week. Ella will be in first grade at the school in our neighborhood. Shout out to Allie and Matt, who are part of our church family and work at Ella's school, which I love. Annalise is starting preschool in the fall, but that doesn't start till after Labor Day. So she has 3 more weeks of summer, which means I have 3 more weeks of summer. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes. How many of you, you like school? Like when you were in it, you liked it, or like maybe you're in it now, and honestly, I like school. Like just raise your hands. I'm just curious. I want to see. Yeah, unsurprisingly, for the part of the country that we live in, most of you who would raise your hand and say like more or less, yeah, I liked school. I would include myself in that. I liked school. I especially liked English and history. Those were like my 2 subjects that I really enjoyed. I was decent at math, but decent is about as high a rating as I would give myself. Science, not so much. Science was not my thing in school growing up. That was not pretty, but mostly my languages were pitiful. Like awful. I took Spanish in high school, thought that I would try something different and do French in college. It was a disaster all the way around. It was not good. So I did not do well in languages. But I really liked seminary. I have a master's in theological studies, and I loved seminary. That was for me 5 of the best years as far as my education goes. And I like seminary. I wrote, and when you do the type of degree that I did, you have to write a thesis paper. And so I wrote mine on the history of women preaching within our movement, the Church of God, Anderson. And apparently I was the only one who wrote a history-based thesis paper because they gave me an award for church history when I graduated, which I swear, I do not understand why. I asked, I tried to poke around, no, thank you, but stop. I tried to ask around and figure out, why did I get this? Does anybody? Nobody knew. But it came with money, so I was okay, I'm good. So last week, Rod kicked off this series. We're focusing on church history over these 4 weeks. Rod kicked it off last week, and we've never done a series like this before. The theme verse for this series is found at the beginning of Hebrews 12. 1 chapter earlier, in Hebrews 11, the writer of Hebrews goes through this long list of people from the Old Testament that's often referred to as the Hall of Faith. And it's people the list includes people like Abel and Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and David and Rahab and the prophets of Israel, and the list just goes on. And then in chapter 12, the writer of Hebrews describes this group as this incredible cloud of witnesses. And the writer says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith." Now, the writer of Hebrews is saying that because followers of Jesus are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, that it should encourage all of us to boldly and courageously live out our faith. And of course, this great cloud of witnesses doesn't end with the people who are listed in Hebrews chapter 11. It doesn't even end with those who are in the Bible. All of us have people in our lives. Maybe for you it's parents or grandparents or mentors or friends, but people that you watched up close live out their faith in bold and courageous ways. And not just the people that we know, but the people throughout all of the 2,000 years of the church, people who have quietly, in ways without fanfare, people whose stories will never be in books, church history books or likewise, people whose names we will never know, who live out their faith in these bold and courageous ways, people who are all a part of this great cloud of witnesses now that they have gone on to be with the Lord. And then there are the people that we do know about, the original apostles, the early church fathers and mothers, those who have been martyred for their faith, the great Christian theologians throughout history, and countless others who followed Jesus and are all a part of that great cloud of witnesses. And we're taking a look at 4 of them over the course of this series. 4 men who all faced unique challenges and unique cultural pressures in their time. And just like us, none of them got it right. They all experienced failure. All of them were people who experienced brokenness, but in all of them, as in us, we see God's power and grace and faithfulness on full display. Now, this is not going to be a class in church history. Some of you are relieved to hear that. But we do want to give you some church history context so that you can better understand how God was at work in the lives of these individuals and also in the life of the church at that time as they were dealing with the cultural pressures of the day, so that you can see how God used them to help us and shaped how we form Scripture through some of their contributions. And in doing so, our hope is that you will see how the story of the church is a part of this much bigger story that God has been writing from the beginning of time. And that you will gain a new perspective on what it means to courageously live out your own faith and persevere in the midst of difficult circumstances and boldly declare the kingdom of God in today's culture. So today's figure in church history comes right on the heels of Justin Martyr, who Rod talked about last week. If you weren't here, I encourage you to go back and listen to that message, particularly because there are some themes that our figure today is kind of taking for granted based on some of the work of Justin Martyr. He was one of the first, if not the first, Christian philosopher. He was raised pagan and was classically educated in Socrates and Plato. He was a philosopher by trade, so to speak, and then becomes a Christian later on in life and uses that skill set that he learned reading Socrates and Plato and applies some of those skills to Christianity to become the first Christian philosopher. And he was eventually martyred for his faith, hence his name, Justin Martyr. Because as Christianity exploded across the Roman Empire, followers of Jesus faced periods of intense persecution. They lived out their faith in the face of the constant threat for hundreds of years of emperors and authorities who often saw this Jesus movement as a profound threat. And so there is this threat coming from outside of the church on Christians, but there also truly are threats coming from inside the church in different ways, because at this point, the church is still trying to figure out just who this Jesus is, trying to figure out what it is that our theology is as a church around the person and nature and character of Jesus. What is it that we believe about Jesus to be true? What is it that we believe about the nature of God to be true? And so different interpretations of different things are popping up in different ways, and there are movements of Christians that are forming around some of these different interpretations. One of those movements that, in my opinion, we're still dealing with in a pretty significant way was called Gnosticism. Or more appropriately for our context, perhaps Christian Gnosticism, as Gnosticism was springing up in places other than just Christianity. The word gnosis, the Greek word gnosis, means knowledge. And Gnostics believed that they had a special knowledge or a secret knowledge that had been given to them by special revelation into the truth of the world. Now, what it boils down to is that the material world is a mistake, or inferior, or a degradation, kind of relative to the soul or the higher world of like thought and knowledge. That is more or less what all Gnostics believed, regardless of the religious faith that they sort of attached themselves to at the time. But Christian Gnostics came to the conclusion that all matter, the material world, the things that we can taste and touch and see and feel, that all matter is evil, or maybe best case scenario, simply unreal. And so so anything that the body desires, for example, food or water or sleep or sex or anything else, is bad and is something to deny. That the desires of the body misguide us, that they can't be trusted. And the goal of the Gnostic is to escape this body and the material world. In fact, the prison of the body is a barrier that must be overcome so that the spirit may receive salvation. I want you to think about that for a second, that for Gnostics, the body is a barrier to salvation. And so the body must be controlled, it must be contained, it must be overcome, its passions weakened, its power limited, so that the spirit may receive salvation. Now, Gnostics believed that originally all of reality was spiritual. And what they describe as a supreme being, so some supreme being created the spiritual world, but had no intention of creating a material world. Instead, that supreme being created additional supreme beings, and one of them kind of fell into error, got off track, and accidentally created matter. And that is how we end up with the material world. There's more, but in the interest of time, let me just highlight then that Christian Gnostics rejected the idea that Christ had a body like ours. For the most part, they thought that he just appeared to have a body, appeared to have been human, appeared to have been born, appeared to have died, but he was not. He was not human. So Gnosticism spreads like crazy, and it's a serious threat to Christianity because, as you can already tell, it's threatening significant doctrines of things like creation, incarnation, resurrection. And so these are things that the church as a whole rallies around pretty quickly to try to combat and to deal with. And one of the most important voices who fought back against Gnosticism was Irenaeus of Lyon. Now, Irenaeus was born around 130 AD, somewhere in Asia Minor, probably Smyrna, which is in modern-day Turkey. This is a picture of him that you can find online if you Google Irenaeus of Lyon, one of the pictures that comes back. But he was from modern-day Turkey, and then for reasons that we don't really know, he lands in Lyon in southern France, where he eventually is made bishop of the church here. And while you hear that, you hear like bishop of the church, and maybe think about like, I don't know, a power broker, like the political influence, religious influence. He was not interested in any of that. Irenaeus was a pastor above all. He wasn't concerned about philosophy or the mysteries of the faith or having influence in that way. He was singularly focused on leading his flock in Christian life and faith, which led him to write quite a bit in an attempt to refute heresy and instruct the believers in his care. And two of his writings have survived, one of which is commonly referred to as Against Heresies. And it was written with the primary and express purpose of refuting Gnosticism. Now, see, Irenaeus saw God as a shepherd who created us in order to have a flock to love and lead. That was why God created us, was to have a flock to love and to lead. He preached that God's purpose is to be joined with humanity, and he believed that humanity was the crown of creation, that it was free from the beginning, so therefore responsible from the beginning to choose to draw near to God or to draw away from God. Irenaeus believed that God has been at work to redeem creation from the Old Testament forward, and thus, in contrast to Gnosticism, God's purpose, according to Irenaeus, is to be joined with the human creature. And this took place in a unique way through Jesus. In Jesus, the divine and the human were made one. And for those of us who have been redeemed by Jesus, we too then have the gift of ever-increasing communion with God. Because of Jesus, we again get to choose to draw close to God, which is all God ever wanted from us in the first place. So I want to look at Genesis 1, which Irenaeus relies on in some pretty significant ways to make his case against Gnosticism. Now, we're not going to read the entire creation narrative right now, but I think you should. In fact, in honor of back to school season, your homework assignment for this week is to read Genesis 1 through 3 in its entirety in one sitting. And I would love it if you would read it out loud, but you get extra credit, which this is Northern Virginia. This is Fairfax County. I know what extra credit means to you people, right? You get extra credit if you read it in a translation other than the one that you normally read the Bible in, all right? So read Genesis 1 through 3 this week. I think you'll just, be good for you. So, but we're starting in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. While a wind from God swept over the face of the waters, then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. Now, most of you are familiar with this part of the Bible. You know that then we have a second day, and a third day, and a fourth day, and that one thing at a time, God has this created order and brings all things into being in this story. But just from these first few verses that we read, we already learned some really important truths. First, we read that God created not just the spiritual world of the heavens, but the material world of the earth, that God created the heavens and the earth. There is one creator, and the creator did not create anything by mistake. Now, the reason I want you to spend some time reading Genesis 1 through 3 this week all the way through is because I think it comes through so clearly when you see it all at once. That God had a plan, that God acted intentionally. And when God creates, God does so with purpose. Now, friends, this is not just true of creation. It's not just true of the heavens and the earth and the plants and the shrubs and the bears and the fish and the birds. It's not just true even of the first humans. It's true of all of creation. God created you. You are part of God's creation, and nothing about you was a mistake. Now, that's a loaded sentence to say in a room full of people whose stories I don't know. But it is absolutely, it's a core part of who I believe God to be. That God doesn't make mistakes, and that nothing about you is a mistake. Now, we aren't at the part of the story yet when humanity screws it all up, right? That's in chapter 3. We haven't gotten there yet. And all of us deal with our own chapter 3s in our own lives that we have to navigate, and I fully acknowledge that. But chapter 3 are the things that we do when we choose, as Irenaeus puts it, to draw away from God, to go our own way. We live in a broken, sinful world, and we are broken, sinful people, but God does not make mistakes with creation. And you are a part of God's creation. You were created by the God of the universe on purpose. And it gets even better. Because in verse 4 and 12 and 18 and 21 and 25, all tell us what God thought of what God created. That God's creation is good. Now, the Hebrew word for good is Tove. And Tove is a big word. It contains multitudes. It occurs over 700 times in the Bible. Tove describes God. It describes God's goodness and God's promises, God's salvation. All of those things are Tove. But it also describes God's design, all that is beautiful and excellent and pleasing to our senses. So I had the very good sense to marry a man who cooks. And 10 out of 10, highly recommend. If you're looking, that's maybe something to put on the list, right? I cook too, and I do fine. But when Kevin cooks, he cooks, okay? When Kevin cooks, I don't think, look, for example, I don't think that Kevin repeated a recipe in our relationship until like year 8. And we had 2 children by then. Like when he cooks, he follows recipes like to the letter. When I cook, I look at this recipe that this particular person was able to get published in a cookbook of recipes, and I think, that looks nice, but I think I have a better idea. And I just sort of throw things, I improvise, I play fast and loose with the recipe, you might say. When Kevin cooks and he puts it on the plate, it looks like the picture. Like what? I don't know. Who does that? My husband, apparently. So it's a common occurrence in our house for one of us to have made dinner, and it gets to the table, and we take the first bite, and you know that moment that happens when you take the first bite of something, and there are no words, there are only sounds? That's Tove. That's Tove right there. Now, maybe for those of you in the room who don't care about food, Tove is like the view at the top of the hike when you've been going and going and going and you can finally look up and you see it. That's Tove. Or maybe for you, Tove is when you sit down and you listen to a master pianist play a concerto, and the piano is perfectly in tune and the acoustics in the room are perfect, and you just get to sit and take it all in. It's like all the pieces of the puzzle all come together in that one moment. That's Tove. And I think that we should maybe take a moment to appreciate here that God is both the creator and the critic who declares that it is Tove. How many of you would say that you are like creative people? Like a creative process is a part of like who you are. Like you are a person who puts something creative out into the world, or who creates something, maybe not out of nothing, but like, you're creative. You're relatively creative in some way. You will appreciate this, I think, to your core. But all of us, I think, will have some sense of what this is like. You'll understand that every person I know who is trying to create something gets to a point where they decide that they just have to be done. Like it's just, I have to step away from this now, right? Like if I look at this another second, I will vomit, right? Or maybe it's that like I can't spend the resources on this anymore. Or maybe it's this is due now and I have to turn it in. I have no choice. It has to be done, right? But every person I know who's trying to create something, myself included, with things like sermons, with things like Bible studies, with other things that we are creating and putting out into the world, there's a point where we have to say, I just have to be done. This just has to be good enough, right? All of us come to a point where we say, whatever it is that we're working on, I have to be done. This has to be good enough. Not because the work is done. The work is never done. But either because of the deadlines or the resources or whatever, something gets good enough and we move on. But here we have a creator who did not create good enough. God created and saw that it was good, that it was Tove. No notes, 5 stars. What God created is good. Irenaeus puts it this way, for even creation reveals him who formed it, and the very work made suggests him who made it. And the world manifests him who ordered it. In other words, God is good, so what God made is good, and the goodness of what was made demonstrates the goodness of the maker. But wait, there's more. Let's skip to the end of chapter 1. Verse 26, then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God saw everything he had made, and indeed, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. Day 6. And God's like, I think I'm getting the hang of this. I'm going to level it up a little bit, right? And so God brings forth, let us make humankind in our image, verse 26 says. And so God does. God created humankind in God's image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. 3 times, the writer tells us, that God created humanity in the image of God, that we are image bearers. Church, you were created in the image of God. You bear the divine image. This is good news and bad news for us. It's good news because it means I bear the image of God, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you. It's bad news because it means that the person who cut me off on the Beltway yesterday is also a bearer of God's image, right? It's bad news, maybe even worse news, because it also means that the person at family gatherings that you try to avoid every time everybody gets together because they're gonna say something that bothers you, or I don't know, you just don't like being around them, is also a person who bears the image of God, that we all bear God's image. And the thing about everyone bearing God's image is that means that we have to honor the image of God in every single person. There are no exceptions to this rule. That we have to bear God's image in everyone, in all people, at all times, and in all ways, including with, starting with, but not limited to, ourselves. We should honor the divine image in ourselves, treat ourselves as image bearers of God, as well as everyone else. Please don't miss that once God had created humans in the image of God, male and female, God looks over all that God has made and sees that it is all very good. It's supremely good. Now that humanity has been created, it's not just Tove, it's very Tove. It's not just the plants and the trees and the shrubs or the mountains or the valleys or the rivers or the birds or the fish or the bears that God says is good. Most of us don't have a hard time believing that. Most of us can get to a mountaintop or go down to the lake or go to the beach or go somewhere out in nature, and we can look out over what we typically call like the creation, and we can say, which it is, we look out at that type of creation and we can like, man, the creator, God is so good. What God created is so good. And that's not a hard one for us to kind of get there, right? But it's harder when we have to turn that to ourselves and look at ourselves and the idea that God made us and that God says that we as part of creation are very good. That you, all of you, bearer of the divine image that you are good. God creates humanity, and God calls humanity very good. Irenaeus argues that God doesn't just see the very goodness of creation, but that God takes delight in it. Now, this is a complicated quote that I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to do my best, but you might just want to take a picture of it and work on it later, because it's something, okay? But I really want you to hear this first line. For the glory of God is a living human, and the life of humanity consists in beholding God. I love that. It goes on to say, for if the manifestation of God, which is made by means of the creation, affords life to all living in the earth, much more does that revelation of the Father, which comes through the Word, that's referring to Jesus, notice the capital W there, that's the revelation of the Father, which comes through the Word, gives life to those who see God. Humanity living brings glory to God, and we are most alive when we see, when we behold, when we observe God. And then Irenaeus transitions, helpfully, nicely for us, to Jesus when he says, the revelation of the Father which comes through the Word, that life truly lived, comes through Jesus. Because thousands of years after Genesis, God decided to become human, to take on flesh. As we talked about last week with Justin, the Word, the Logos, becomes flesh and takes up residence among us, the Message says. I've always loved that translation, that it moves into the neighborhood. That Jesus, the Son of God, the Logos of God, wanted to be with us, not content to be far away from us, that God will stop at nothing to be with us. And so God takes on a human body and lives as a human, and then dies a human bodily death, and then is resurrected with a human body. Luke 24 tells the story that the disciples are standing around, and a couple of them have seen Jesus, but not everyone has seen Jesus yet. And so they're standing around talking about, is he alive, is he not alive, whatever. And then all of a sudden, Jesus appears to them. And they think he's a ghost, because he died, right? They all saw it happen. And he appears to them, and he says this, starting in verse 39, look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, do you have anything here to eat? Because he's hungry. And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate in their presence. He invites them to touch his body, and then he eats food with his body to demonstrate that all of him, the divine and the human, was resurrected. That his body was resurrected right along with the rest of him. Well, I think we take this for granted, but it is truly remarkable that the resurrection isn't just about our eternal souls, that it's about all of us being redeemed and reconciled to our Creator God. You know, Gnosticism, it hasn't really gone anywhere. It's considered a heresy for the church and has been for nearly 2,000 years, but it's alive and well in our cultural reality. This idea that our bodies are bad, that we have to control them, that we have to contain them, that our body wants what it can't have. And if we could just have enough willpower, enough discipline, then we can make our bodies be or look or do whatever it is that we want. And you can see why, because certainly the body desires things that are not always in our best interest, right? If I were to listen to the desires of my body 100% of the time, all I would ever eat is candy and popcorn. And I would sleep way more than I do, right? And plenty of other things as well. And sometimes we make choices that are bad for our bodies, no doubt. And sometimes the choices that we make that are bad for our bodies cause us to want to make more choices that are also bad for our bodies. So we have agency over these bodies that we have been given. We have agency to make choices that are bad for us or good for us, certainly. But that doesn't make our bodies bad. Jess Connolly, in her book, Breaking Free from Body Shame, asks this question of those who believe that their bodies are bad because of something they have done or has been done to them. She says, are you strong enough to undo what God has said? I heard that this week, and it hit me in the face. Are you strong enough to undo what God has said? Because God has said that you are good. God has said that our bodies are good. We believe that our bodies were created by God, that Jesus came in an earthly body, that God created the heavens and the earth, all the material world, and declared it very good, and that Jesus was resurrected in his bodily form, and that we will experience a bodily resurrection one day, that our bodies are part of what is made right by Christ's death and resurrection. It's with our bodies that we hug the ones that we love most in the world, and it's with our bodies that we run and jump and dance. It's with our bodies that we eat good food and drink good coffee, and it's with our bodies that we create art. It's with our bodies that we can bring comfort to someone who is hurting. It's with our bodies that we can sometimes bring forth new life. Our bodies are good, and we are not truly living without them. Our bodily desires, rightly ordered, tell us how to care for ourselves, how to be healthy. And in 2024, there is still so much that we are still learning about how our bodies try to protect us and work for us and help us. And yet this idea is pervasive, that what matters most about you is what's on the inside. It's what's in your head. It's the things you believe. It's the things that you know. It's your spirit. It's your soul. Those things all matter. I'm not saying that the body is more important. I'm saying the body is important, that in order to be truly living, that we have to be integrated whole people, and that the body is part of the wholeness that we live from. By the way, men and women deal with this issue pretty much equally. While statistics tell us that 98% of women deal with body image issues, 95% of men do so as well. So while culturally it's tempting to think this is a women's issue, we understand that this is a human issue. And I guess what I hope for more than anything is that today, maybe, some of us can embrace a theology of being human that is more in line with what God says about us. That we were created by God on purpose. That God calls God's creation good. That we bear the image of God. That God took on a human body and lived and walked among us and died for us and was resurrected for us so that we can live out the reason that we were created, to be with God. And that's where I want us to end today, with an opportunity for each of us to choose to draw near to our Creator. That we might allow God to begin some healing work in us about some of the lies that we have been told about who we are, about our bodies, and about ourselves. To maybe allow God to speak truth into our hearts to help heal the lies that in some cases we've told ourselves. May you hear the words of Genesis 1 wash over you as you draw near to God in prayer and worship today. If you don't mind, I would love it if you would just maybe close your eyes, maybe bow your heads, and just hear these words one more time. So God created humankind in God's image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. And God saw everything that God had made, and indeed, it was very good. Let me pray for you. God, you are good. The only one worthy of our worship. The one we desire to draw near to today. And God, while we can hear intellectually that our bodies are not barriers to being with you, sometimes it feels like it's maybe just one of the barriers. Either because of what someone has said to us or the many, many messages that are out there about our bodies, God. It's hard to believe your truth. So I pray that in these moments that maybe all the other messages would be quiet, and that you would whisper to our hearts that one word, that we are Tove, just as we are, you created us on purpose. And you looked at what you created and you said, that is very good. God, in these moments, may we draw near to you. And may you do a healing work in us in the places we need it. Thank you for who you are and for what you've done for us. Amen. I want to invite you as we sing to maybe take whatever posture of worship will best set you up to drawing near to God. To allow this song to be a moment maybe for God to continue to do some work in your spirit. And so if that means that you stand and sing, great. Maybe it means that you kneel. Maybe it means you find a different place in the room. Maybe it means you just sit at your seat. But may you not waste this moment to draw near to God in worship in whatever way is best for you. Worship with us.